Hello and welcome to this short video and introduction to DISC profiling. My name is John Belchamber and I'll be taking you through this short look at DISC profiling and how it can help you in your organisation. Just to give you an update on what we're going to look at, we'll start off just look at some of the challenges that DISC meets. We'll go through some history of DISC before we look at the model of DISC behaviour itself, and finally some applications that you can use DISC with in your business or your organisation. It was once said by the Financial Times that we hire people for their technical skills and we fire them for their behaviour. In my consulting period since 1998 in Australia, I've often unfortunately found this to be true, in that we can often train technical skills, but organisations, number one, look for the technical skills but ignore the behavioural side. I often talk about a manager I once knew whose interviewing technique was checking the appearance of the person, making sure they smiled, counting their arms and legs, and then employing them. Surprise, surprise, often he didn't get the person that he was looking for when he was recruiting. The other thing that often happens, especially in small businesses, is that we start out our business and we're very good at what we do, and then we get very busy, so we decide that we're going to hire someone to work with us, and the natural thing to do is to hire someone that we get on well with. So you look for people with the same background of you and get a good gut feeling about them, but often when we hire them we realise that perhaps they can't do what we want them to, and they've got the same strengths as us possibly, but that means they've also got the same limitations, so our business doesn't move forward because we're lacking some of the skills that we could do with. So that's one of the areas that DISC is going to help you do by understanding exactly what your business needs behaviourally as well as technically. The other area is diversity. Do you ever find yourself in a meeting with a room full of people and you're trying to explain to people what it is you want them to understand, but they just don't get it? And you get frustrated with how difficult it is for people to communicate with. And sometimes you get tired of repeating yourself time and time and time again. Well, often that's to do with their behavioural style and the way they like to communicate and take on board information, not matching up with your own style. So another area that DISC is going to help you with is by helping you to understand the diversity and adjust your style to communicate far better with other people. So let's move on, and we'll have a very quick look at 2,000 years of history in approximately 30 seconds. Some of you may be aware of a philosopher back in 465 BC known as Hippocrates. Hippocrates in the West is known as the father of modern science. He was the first doctor, if you like. Although I made the mistake once of making that statement in Beijing, and over there the Chinese quite rightly don't believe that Hippocrates was the father of medicine. But anyway, Hippocrates believed that he saw the 4 different behaviours of people coming into his surgery. He called it sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric and melancholic, basically meaning they had too much blood or something with their blood, or too much phlegm, or they had yellow bile, or they had black bile. He believed that the changes of behaviour was because of those physical attributes, which obviously today we know isn't the case. But it's fascinating that going back to 2,500 years was when profiling as we know it first started. Zoom forward to 1920, and some of you may know Carl Gustav Jung, a contemporary of Freud, Sigmund Freud. He wrote a book called The Psychological Type, which introduces the personality types of sensing, intuitive, feeling and thinking, which we know well today, and pretty much every psychometric profile goes back to Jung's work. But in 1928, our hero, a man called William Moulton Marsden, wrote a book called The Emotions of Normal People, which introduced the DISC model for the first time. As an aside, Marsden also invented the lie detector, and he went on to write Wonder Woman, which often makes me wonder about his profile. So Marsden postulated, he took the choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic and turned them into 4 factors that we know as DISC: dominance, influence, steadiness and compliance. So DISC, they're the 4 broad behavioural factors that Marsden's model put forward. But what he said was that when people go out into the world, some people are fairly assertive in that they like to take action. They don't just sit back and wait for things to happen to them. They move forward and take action. Whereas at the other end of that scale, people are more passive. So they'll consider their options, think about what they're going to do before they take action. And then on our second model, in the biaxial model of DISC, On one side, we have people who are controlled. Now, the controlled people, in terms of communication, they tend to think about what they're going to say before they say it. Whereas on the open side, they're a lot more communicative. And I guess we don't have introvert and extrovert in DISC, but this scale would be the closest to it, because the open communicator is a lot like an extrovert who tends to use the actual communicating as a way of thinking through what they want, what their thoughts are, whereas the controlled person will have thought it through before they speak. Along that scale also, it's interesting, we should note that people on the control side will tend to make their decisions based around facts and figures. So they like to dot the I, cross the T, consider what it is, understand the facts before they'll make a decision. Whereas on the open side, they're going to think mostly about feelings and how people will feel about that decision as they move forward. So if we take a look at where the four factors, where the four factors fit on this scale, we can see D, I, S, and C. So we can see that D, dominance, with the word dominance, you'd expect they're all about power. So they tend to drive forward, they're domineering, egocentric, demanding, quite commanding, and very assertive, taking action. And their decisions are based around facts. On the other side of there, we have the influence, who are all about people. Their number one thing is that people like them. They fear rejection. They tend to be quite talkative, energetic, inspiring individuals, fairly impulsive, optimistic. So as you can see, they're still assertive, but they're also very open in their communication. Moving down to S, the steadiness factor, they're all about the pace of doing things. The high S will usually be observant, unemotional, rigid, prepared, systematic, organised, prearranged. So they're still very much about people. They make their decisions about people, but they're also very considered, and they'll like to follow a process and be steady pace in their approach. Over on the control side and passive, we have the last but not least, the compliance, which is a type of person. The high C is all about policy. So they're very good at dotting I's, crossing T's, quite painstaking and wary, not likely to make a decision without all the facts, very meticulous, precise, analytical, quality conscious, and often somewhat of a perfectionist. So there are four main factors. Now obviously we're three-dimensional people, we're not just one-dimensional. So DISC, you'll find that people use a combination of these traits. We can all, of course, use all of the behaviours, but you find that people tend to have behaviours that they lean to, their preferred style of behaviour, the styles that they will use or revert to naturally. So let's have a little quick look. When you do a DISC profile, by the way, the DISC profile takes about 10 minutes to complete online, and the report is almost available immediately once you've finished. The DISC will produce a range of graphs, which we'll look at in a second. But you'll see on this scale, we have the centre line on the graph, and the graph is plotting the D, the I, the S, and the C. So the dominance, the influence, the steadiness, and compliance. At the bottom of the graph is a scale of 0. At the top of the graph is a scale of 100. So you'll see that the DISC will give you a score of 0 to 100 in a percentage scale. Now, 90% doesn't mean you've passed in that factor, and 0 means you've failed. It's just your level of dominance, influence, steadiness, or compliance. When I look at the graph, we have a centre line there, and I like to think about that as the ground. And if you think about the ground in a tree coming out of the ground, everything that you see in that tree, it's what tells you what type of tree it is. So the leaves, the blossoms, the fruit. It's the same with a DISC graph. Everything above the centre line is the behaviours that you will see in a person. So in the graph that we're showing here, they've got an I above the line. So this is a very high influence person, very communicative, friendly, persuasive. But the problem with that is if you only had the tree with things above the ground, the minute the wind blew, the tree would fall over. So you have to have roots below the ground. And the same with DISC graphs. You have to have at least one factor below the line, or indeed one factor above. And what's below the line is they're what we call the low factors or the drivers. So it tells us what a person likes and what they dislike when they go about it. Whereas above the line is their working strengths and tells us what they're all about, what their fears, and what their motivators are. So here are the graphs I talked about. Discus will actually produce 4 graphs, and I just thought we'd have a quick look so you can understand those when hopefully you go on to produce a report for yourself or for your friends, colleagues or family. The first graph is called the internal graph. And the internal graph is basically showing you what your preferred style of behaviour is. What are the behaviours that you will default to? So often they're not only the behaviours that you would like to use in an ideal working environment, but they're also the behaviours you may default to if you're put under pressure. The second graph is the external graph. I often call this the work mask. If you can imagine, this is the mask you put on when you go to work, and it's what your colleagues would see of you at work. So when we profile you, it's like taking a snapshot of you on that particular day. The internal graph is saying how you would like to be behaving. The external graph is saying how you actually are behaving in order to be successful in your role currently. Somewhere between the internal and the external is the summary graph. So the summary graph is saying, well, okay, you may be making shifts in your behaviour from your preferred style, but the summary style is a style that you'd be more than happy to behave in on a regular basis. And then lastly, the shift pattern. What is interesting when we're looking at a DISC profile is a discussion that we can have with someone about, well, if you are changing your behaviour, obviously there's something happening in the working environment that means you need to change that behaviour. Why are you doing it? Or what are those factors? Because in a perfect world, you'd be behaving the way that you show on your internal graph. So the shift graph is a very quick way for someone to look at that and go, okay, well, I can quickly see that this person's S factor has dropped quite a bit. And as we can see from the internal, they've got a high S, and then on the external, they've got a low S. So the bigger the shift, the more of an impact it's likely to have on the person. So that's the 4 DISC graphs from which all of the words in the report now come. When I first started doing DISC profile in 1998, we used to have to manually score the reports, draw the graphs, go to a big book of reports with hundreds of profiles and write the reports. Thankfully now, it's all done online, all done on the internet, and there are millions of combinations of words that can come out from your response to the graphs. So expanding a little bit further on what each profile factor is like, let's look at the D. So I said that above the line tells us what the person is all about, and below the line tells us what they like and what they dislike. So when we look at the high D, dominance, as I said, they're all about power. They like to be in control, they like to be the boss, so they will strive to be in charge. They're also about achieving goals. They don't like to lose. Their big fear is failure. So they're motivated by having goals. So they like to set goals for themselves, they like to achieve goals for themselves, but they do not like to fail. So if you're managing a high D, you've got to show them how whatever you do is going to give them more power, make them more responsible, more in charge. You've got to set them goals that they have to work hard to achieve. Don't set them things that are too easy because they'll get bored, but also don't set them goals that they can't possibly achieve. Because that's their biggest fear, failure. At the other end, the low D really dislikes responsibility. They don't want to be in charge, and they much prefer to work within a team environment. And we'll expand on the Ds in a second, and the Is and the different factors. Moving on to the I, the high I, they're all about people. Their biggest fear is rejection. So they want you to be their friend. They want you to like them. And they don't like it if you reject them. They are actually motivated by getting recognition. So if you go into a high I's office, for example, you'll often see a certificate that they've got a degree. But what they would much prefer to have is a photograph of on the wall of them receiving that certificate from somebody famous, because that shows that they know these important people. The low I, however, dislikes involvement. It's not that they don't like people, but they don't need people to like them. You'll often find them in roles where they get to specialise and become a bit of an expert in an area. And they're quite happy to drill down into work and not see anyone all day. They're quite happy just to, they don't want to be overly involved in social activity. Moving on to the S. High S is all about pace. So think about a steady-paced approach to working and doing things. Because their fear is insecurity, so they like to be in a secure environment. They're motivated by security. Whereas the low S, they actually like to have lots of things happening. They're very fast-paced. They get very bored easily. you'll find that they juggle lots of activities at once. I'm not saying they finish all those activities off, whereas the high S would make sure they finish something off before they move on to the next thing. The low S likes to get lots of things happening so they don't get bored. And then moving on to the C, compliance. The high C is all about policy. They'll like to have rules. If there's no rule book in place, the high C will write one. So, their biggest fear is trouble. They don't like conflict. And if everybody followed the rules, there would be no conflict. So they're actually motivated by the rules and following the rules. Whereas the low C likes to throw the rule book out the window. They really don't like being controlled. They want to do it their own way in their own time. So they're very, very independent and love being out there. They're the type of person that you can give them a mobile phone or Yellow Pages and say go and sell something, and they'll love it because they just want to get out there and do their own thing. So let's expand on the D's again a little bit further. So as we've said, the high D, all about power, achieving goals, fear failure. So, they'll drive forward. They're quite domineering. They'll often appear rude or blunt. They're not being. They're just getting to the point, getting to the facts. Can be quite egocentric, often demanding, commanding, unconquerable, argumentative, aggressive, pioneering type individuals. Whereas the low D, like I said, they dislike responsibility, they like to be in teams, so they can be more mild, meek, agreeable, dependent, gentle, uncertain, a little bit more docile, humble and reserved. The value to the organisations, well, if you're looking for someone to achieve results, take action, live up to challenges, in fact love challenges, thrive on challenges, take decisions often without precedent, and just assume authority, well then your high D is a factor that you're probably going to be looking for in a profile. Whereas if what you want is someone that is good at calculating risks, is quite cautious before moving forward, likes to collect facts, deliberates and self-sacrifices in order for the team, then the low D is where you probably a factor you'll be looking for in your people. Influence. Well, we've talked about the high I is all about communication, and they're an open communicator. So as you'd expect, they're quite talkative, very energetic, can inspire people quite well. They tend to be pretty impulsive. They're usually optimistic. If you know De Bono's hats, very yellow hat, always looking on the bright side. Can be very demonstrative and enthusiastic, effervescent, and gregarious. So they're the life, usually the life and soul of the party. I always recommend that if you've got an open plan office, don't sit then by the water cooler because they'll get distracted every time someone comes to get a drink. Where's your low I? They're not, as I said, they like to seek specialisation, don't really worry about getting involved too much. So, they're quite mannered and modest, can be reclusive sometimes even. Can appear aloof. They're not being aloof. It's just that they're not worried about impressing you all the time. Fairly contemplative, reflective, can seem withdrawn, suspicious and cynical because they're also quite logical and precise in their approach to things. Their value to the organisation, well, people contact is the high I. That's what they're all about. They're motivated by people liking them. So if you want someone to get out there and articulate something, motivate people to action, generate enthusiasm and show that people count, then the high I is your person that you're looking for. However, if you want someone that's capable of focusing and concentrating on work content and happy to work alone, is very logical, is a fact finder and thinks that things matter more than people, then probably your low I is the one you should have. Moving on to steadiness. The high S, we've said that they value security and they're about pace. So high S's are very observant. They pick up on their changes to their environment and tend to be fairly unemotional, can be quite rigid in their approach. High S's, because they value security, will tend to put a process in place. They'll have a way we do things and they'll stick to that process because it works, why change it? They will always be prepared for whatever they're about to do. They're very systematic and organised. They'll arrange things in advance and tend to do things in a habitual way. So they like to follow processes and they're extremely loyal to their organisations and the people that they work with. Whereas your low S, because they get bored easily and they're looking for change, etc., they can be quite zealous. They're pretty frenetic and excitable, impulsive, impetuous. They often appear like they're under pressure all the time, but they love that. They put themselves under time restraints, pressures, and because it drives them. They're quite fidgety, intensive, and progressive. So what would you be looking for in a role? Well, if you're looking for someone that performs to a work pattern, that is very patient, often likes to go for specialised skills, can concentrate for long periods of time, and is a very good listener and likes to provide support to others, then a high S is possibly part of the behavioural factors that you would be looking for. Whereas if you want someone that has the ability to quickly react to change and multitask and gets dissatisfied if things are the same, doesn't like the status quo, is looking to change things, is very optimistic, pick up, there's an opportunity, run with it, then your low S is probably a factor that you'd be looking for. Moving on to compliance. Well, the high C, very painstaking in their approach, always wary, meticulous, they dot the I, cross the T's, can be somewhat of a perfectionist. They'll be precise. Analytical is a word we use a lot for the high C. Very conscious about quality, getting things right, and focused on the detail. So you see some similarities between the high C and the low I. They complement each other, and in fact, if you're a high C with a low I, it increases your level of perfectionism and precision and meticulous. The low C on the other side, though, remember we said the high C loves the rule book and the low C likes to be independent. So the low C can be pretty careless in their approach, not the most diplomatic of people sometimes, especially if they've got a low I and a low S, because they're not really worried about people, they just want to get things done. They can be sarcastic, pretty revolutionary. They don't like the rule book, so they're going to fight against it, and defiant, stubborn often. Usually pretty uninhibited in terms of their approach, free-spirited and fearless. So, in what sort of areas would you use these people? Well, a high C. If you want someone that's going to follow directions, is good at controlling quality, concentrates on detail, checks for accuracy, is diplomatic, well then your high C is probably where you're going to be looking. Whereas if you want someone that's going to take authority, act independently, isn't afraid of conflict, and will face up to it, acts without a precedent and takes unpopular positions if they need to, then you may well want to look at your low Cs. So here I'm just showing you, obviously there's hundreds of different combinations of profile that you can come up with by moving the D, I, S's and C's around. But these are some of the more common ones. So the top left here we've got the dominant pure high D, moving across to the assertive with high D, high I, influencer, open, steady, passive, compliant and controlled. I guess these are the main factors, and you can see I'm showing you here in the middle where they sit on that assertive, passive, open and controlled scale. This image, by the way, if any of you would like to get a copy of my slideshow or like to get a graphic of this image, please email me. I'll give you the address at the end, and only too happy to spread the word of DISC for you. So applications. In this short video, I haven't got time to go into it in great detail, but we'll have a quick look at some of the main one. So DISC profiling, they obviously profile yourself, profile your colleagues, so understand your own behaviour. I usually say that you need to know yourself first before you can understand others. And if you think about DISC, if you can understand yourself through the DISC model of behaviour, and you can understand other people through the DISC model of behaviour, well, now you know what your motivators are, how you like to communicate, what motivates you, what your fears are, and you'll also know what those of other people are as well, so you can start to build your interpersonal skills a lot quicker. One of the original uses for DISC was in actual fact in recruitment, and my recollection from Marsden is that some of the early uses for DISC profiling was in the military, for helping select people for different roles. I know, for example, the Australians out there will know Sid Fisher, a famous sailor. He used DISC profiling to select crews on his ocean yacht racing teams, and was fairly successful at doing that. And there are countless applications for selecting people for your teams. The idea being is you have a range of candidates. I warn you now that you need to look at, first of all, things like their education, their experience, their technical skills, the demographic information, all the other slices of the recruitment pie first. But when you get to three, so you've got three candidates that all things are equal in those areas, if you don't look at behaviour and ignore the behaviour, you're likely to make that mistake. We hire them for their technical skills and fire them for their behaviour. So DISC has a job profiling element built in where we can actually profile the behavioural demands of the job that you're recruiting for. You might, for example, fill in a questionnaire. If there's never been anyone in that role before, we can produce a profile based on asking you questions about what the demands of the role are. However, what I've done a lot with organisations is benchmarking their best people in a particular role. And we take a sample of their best performers and a sample of their bottom performers, and we look to see if there are profiles that clearly the top performers have that the bottom performers don't. And then we can turn that profile or those profiles into the job profile for you to compare your candidates against. Once you've done that, profile the candidate, compare them against the job, and it's going to come up with what are your best matches. Now, it isn't always about getting a 100% match. In an ideal world, we get a 100% match plus all the other skills and experience would be what we're looking for. But let's say you've got someone who's got all the skills and experience and their behaviour matches sort of 75, 80%. What it'll tell you then is, okay, well, where are the gaps? What are the areas you may need to help them with in terms of behavioural? If they are 20%, 30%, you'd probably be making a mistake to bring them into your business because they're going to have to either change their behaviour so much to work in your business that it will be quite energy draining for them, or they won't change their behaviour and they just won't fit into your culture and your team. An extra feature within Discus itself is team profiling. And I'm pleased to say that with team profiling as a Discus user, you pay for the initial individual profile, but team profiling and relationship reporting is all free of charge. It's extra features that Discus offers you that others don't. So the way Discus works is you profile your individuals, and then you put their profiles into a team. And the team profile will report on things like how do the team behave as a whole? What is this team's strengths, limitations? What are the style of the team? What do they respond to? It'll also, if you allocate the team leader, it'll say, well, okay, well, this is how the team like to be managed as a whole. Well, this is the leader's leadership style based on their DISC profile. Where are the gaps? Where do they need to focus on in order to tweak the way they manage this team? In addition to that, we've got relationship reports. So we can do a report that says, how will person A get on with person B? And the report does that from both perspectives. It says person A will think this of B and B will think this of A. And in addition, if person A is the team leader, it takes into account that person is the leader, therefore they have a slightly different relationship to two peers. So that's Discus team profiling, which can help you do that. Another addition with team profiling is what I call impact profiling. Let's say that you've got a team, and now you've got your candidates that you're looking at to bring into that team. You can put the candidate A in and see what impact they have on the team. Take them out, put candidate B in, see what impact they have on the team, and decide which one might suit you most. And obviously do relationship reports and a new team profile report so that the manager and the members of the team can understand this new member before they come aboard. And the other way around, the new member of the team can get an understanding of who they are going to work with. A big use for that is in, for example, project teams. If you've got a project, 6-month project, you can't afford for a team to go through the storming, norming, performing stage over 6 months because the project's only lasting 6 months. So by using DISC profiling up front, you can give the team some information on how they're going to react and how they're going to behave with each other and give them a head start and speed up the team performance process. Before I close, I'll just quickly let you know the types of reports that are available within Discus. To let you know, I'm a distributor of Discus, so I can set you up with your own Discus account where you can use the reports as and when you need, and you just buy the credits to use it. Or you can come to me and say, John, please do the reporting and the feedback, and I'll give you a consultancy service for that. But the key reports in Discus are the classic report, 20 plus pages. It's going to give you full information on the person's preferred behavioural style, and there's 10 sections of textual descriptions used basically in plain, simple language, created to allow you to understand very quickly as much about that individual person. We have an extension on that called the Enhanced Report, which is going to give you a lot of extra depth from the Classic, with an extra 11 sections. For example, it'll talk about how a person might be in a customer service role, and a sales role, and a leadership role, what they might be like as a team player. It'll give you questions to ask at interview to explore some of their strengths and some of their limitations, to see if, is this limitation going to have a big impact on us when they come in. And bear in mind that could be internal or external recruitment. So that's the enhanced report. The job profile report, as I said, that's what profiles the job role. So we can build a profile of the role before you go out there to fill the role internally or externally. Make sure you're comfortable with it, and then we can use that to compare the person. As an aside again, job profiling within Discus is a free and unlimited report. So you can produce as many of those as you would like to. The job match report. So here we go. I've got person A. How do they match against the job that I'm looking to recruit them for? Or we can use it as I've got person A, and there are over 200 different job profiles in Discus at the moment, plus any that you put in yourself, and you can compare person A against all of the jobs and see which ones they're most likely to match. So I've got clients that use that for career coaching, career counselling, etc., etc. The relationship report, as we talked, again, they're free. Once you've profiled the individuals, the job profiling report and the relationship report are free and unlimited. And that's taking two people, the dynamics of that working relationship between the two people. And then the team report, last but not least. So an extensive breakdown of the workings of your team, also highlighting the main dynamics within the team, the roles that different team members will take on, and leadership issues within the team that may be. So that's my quick introduction. I hope you've found it of value. I would encourage and warmly welcome any questions from you. For those of you that have never used this before, I can only highly recommend it to you as being a very quick, cost-effective way of building the performance in teams, and helping people understand, how to work better as a team, how to look after their customers better, how to increase their sales by understanding how to relate to their prospects. If you'd like to find out more, my contact details are on the screen here. Please email me, go to my website, johnbelchamber.com, or invokeresults.com, whichever you prefer. I'm on Twitter, at johnbelchamber, or if you want to make a note now of my mobile number, it's Australia 61 0406 547 914. Anyway, as I said, thank you very much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I really hope to hear from you soon. Goodbye.